That sick calf that I was saying was doing a little bit better yesterday. I took a look at him this morning, and I would say that he's not sick anymore. I took a look at him this morning. I would say he's not sick. I think he's gotten over the illness, but he was sick for so long that he is just absolutely bone thin. I mean, he's like a little skeleton. He's like a little skeleton with a little gut on him. And, I would say he's not sick anymore, but he is extremely emaciated. And so this morning, I took a look at him, and I was like, well, he's not breathing hard. He's hardly coughing. He's not breathing hard, but he is extremely emaciated. And so I just went ahead and I let him out. And he's taking a liking to the grass. I don't really care what he eats. That grass out there, I got some regrowth. I don't have a lot of grass out there. It's maybe 2 or 3 inches tall, and it's very patchy. But I do have some grass out there, and the feed values of the grass are pretty good, right? I mean, it's regrowth. And so, I let him out there, and he started eating the grass. And I was like, you know what? If you want to eat the grass, you can eat the grass. Eat whatever you want. Just eat something, because, well, not whatever you want, but, if whatever he's eating is decent feed values, he can have at it. And so he's really taking a liking to the grass. He's actually still over there chewing on it. He's found himself a little patch of grass, a good little patch of grass. I was over there looking at him, and he's still sitting there chewing on it. And so that's very good. I don't really care. He's got to eat something. He's very thin. He's very emaciated. He was sick for a very long time, and I don't think he's sick anymore, but he is extremely thin. And so, okay, yesterday, the whole thing, I got this, okay, here's the thing. I was saying, this farm will make me, on this 10.5 acre field, I will make about $350,000-$500,000, right? And here is the thing. I would bet that in just the next 30 days, and this is also what I mean by I will probably make more than 150, all right? I would bet that over the next 30 days, I end up making over 30 grand in just the next month. All right, I will make over 30 grand. All right, and and I've talked about this whole thing about money. And when I make money, what I do with the money is I make more money with it, right? That's the whole big idea. And in terms of, and I speak about this, the whole idea of, in terms of a broader perspective, the idea of money and, my whole situation, the whole thing about this is that, all right, when it comes to money, all right, I'm effectively, whatever else, maybe whatever else, right? But when it comes to money, I am effectively one of the best in the world at it. Legitimately one of the best in the world. I'm not like the best in the world, but I am in the very top percentiles of understanding money. All right, of utilizing capital and in a positive way, and et cetera, et cetera. All right, the whole idea of okay, and just to put things in perspective. If I decided that I did not want to be in the cattle business anymore, right? I've spoken about this. If I legitimately decided that I did not want to be in the cattle business anymore, why would I do that? Right? The cattle business makes me hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Why would I give up the cattle business, right? It'd be moronic. But let's just say one day I decided, you know what? I don't want to be in the cattle business anymore. All right, I just want to go and I want to work 40 hours and just call it a day, right? I just want to pay my bills and just sit in my little house. That's what I feel like doing, right? If I felt like doing that, if I liquidated all of my assets and I just bought the S&P 500 and I went and I fried chicken at Wingstop, I would still effectively make enough money to do anything on the entire planet for the rest of my life. Granted that the S&P 500 made an 8% return a year. All right, this is the whole idea of investing, right? And because, and just on a side note, because like on the internet and, whatever, I see these things and it's like, oh my God. And I've always said, the whole thing is if you find a bunch of poor people and they are looking to lump together, then you should avoid that group of people, right? Because that's called the moron megazord. What if all the poor people got together and we rose up against the rich people, that, right? You know, which is moronic. Why? I mean, you know, what if the rich people, and I've always said, you know, when poor people do things, imagine what if the rich people did the same thing? What if all the rich people just said, you know what, we're all just going to band together and we're just going to crush the poor people? What if the rich people started doing stuff like that? Right? Well, you know, would that be morally correct? And when you take a look at my situation, all right, in all reality, like in terms of a realistic perspective, I am a legitimate rich person, right? I don't have to worry about money at all. At all, 0%. Even if I felt like giving up the cattle business, which I wouldn't do. Why would I do that? But you know, the cattle business, I would bet, I would be willing to bet that I make over 30 grand in just the next 30 days. All right, why would I give up the cattle business? The cattle business makes me hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Why would I stop the cattle business? Why would I give up the cattle business? Right. I mean, you know, and, you know, but, you know, the whole thing is, you know, and I've talked about this, you know, if you ever see it, you know, because you'll see it all the time, what I call the moron megazord. All right. You know, oh my God, all the poor people should just lump together. Right. We should all just lump together, and then we should just, you know, whatever, go on this magical journey together. Avoid that situation. All right. You don't want to be in a moron megazord. All right, you don't want to be in that situation. Go out into the world and think for yourself. Take a look at things for what they are. Right? If anything, surround yourself with rich people. All right, because at the end of the day, and I spoke about this, the whole thing about this whole thing is like, you know, in terms of an all reality perspective, I effectively have made enough money to legitimately walk off into the sunset for the rest of my life. If I felt like it, I could just liquidate all of my assets and put all of the money in the S&P 500, go fry chicken at Wingstop, and even then I would effectively make enough money to buy anything on the entire planet for the rest of my life. Granted that I did not become an idiot. Oh my God, now is my chance to go and buy myself a giant house. I'm gonna go and buy a, you know, whatever, a $4 million house. Granted that I didn't do something like that. Oh my God, now it's time to go and buy a bunch of drugs. Now it's time to go and buy a bunch of alcohol. If I legitimately just sat there, put all of my money in the S&P 500 and just went and got myself a job, because I would do something, right? What, you know, why would I sit in an apartment or whatever in a house and not do anything? That would be borderline miserable, right? It would, I mean, it'd be one step away from being a bum. So I would go and get a job, and if I legitimately got an 8% return on my money from the S&P 500 a year, and I worked my job, I could effectively buy anything on the entire planet for the rest of my life. That's what it looks like to legitimately be rich. You know, it doesn't matter. All right, money is borderline negligible to me. It's borderline negligible. It doesn't matter. And the whole thing about this is like, when it comes to the cattle business, why would I give up the cattle business when the cattle business makes me hundreds of thousands of dollars a year? My net worth would tank by millions of dollars if I stopped being in the cattle business. And just to put things in perspective, I would bet that I make over 30 grand in the next 30 days. All right, in the next 30 days, I will make over $30,000. All right, and I've spoken about this. You know, I make about $1,200 a day. All right, I make about something between $1,200 and $1,400 a day. And the whole idea of investing is just to put things in perspective. When I fall asleep, my business continues to operate. My investments continue to just be my investments, right? By the time I wake up, if I sleep for 8 hours, by the time I wake up, I would have made myself about $350. $350, $400, something like that. Actually, it would be like $400, $450. Because, you know, 24 divided by 8 is 3. So a third of that. I would have made myself about $450 while I was sleeping. All right, I mean, you know, that's effectively the situation that I'm in. Because let's say that, let's say I go and I sell my cattle, right? Let's say I go and I sell my cattle and I make money, and I take that money and I purchase more cattle. And when I purchase more cattle, I purchase these animals at their appraisal values, and I just follow the business plan to a fine detail. Did I spend any money? No, I did not. I get to keep all of my money because I took my money and I purchased a tax deductible asset at its appraisal value. All right, granted that the only time that I ever lose money is when an animal dies. That's it. Effectively, that's the only time that I ever lose money. If I go to the sale barn and I sell animals and I take that money and I purchase more animals with that money, then I took my assets, liquidated, took the cash, and purchased another asset that is tax deductible, and I purchased these assets at their appraisal values. All right, I get to keep all of my money. All right, I get to keep all of the money, and if I ever legitimately need money, then I can just pay myself whatever I need. Am I good? That's effectively how it works. All right, and I've always talked about this. I would rather have a good asset than cash. Cash is not a very good asset. All right, cash is not a very good asset. I would rather have a good asset than cash. All right, and so, when I take a look at the whole, but that's legitimately what, I've legitimately managed to make myself enough money to walk off into the sunset if I felt like it. If I said, you know what, I don't want to be in the cattle business anymore. I don't want to do this anymore, right? Let's say that I did that, which I'm not going to do. If anything, I'm actually going the other way, right? I'm actually looking to grow my business, right? I'm not sitting here going, oh my God, now's my chance to walk off into the sunset. Now I'm going to go and buy myself a Lamborghini and, whatever. I'm not, if anything, I'm going the other way, right? I'm looking to grow my business, right? I'm looking to grow my business because I said, why not? Right? I sat there, I thought about it. I understand that I am making a drastic amount of money. I understand that I am making a massive sum of money, right? I understand this, right? And I've taken a look at it and I've decided, what should I do? Right? I mean, I could legitimately, one of the things that I could do is legitimately walk off into the sunset for the rest of my life. All right, if I legitimately just felt like, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm just going to sell everything that I have, take that money, put it in the S&P 500, and then go and fry chicken at Wingstop because I love, it's fun to work the fryer. If I went and I started frying chicken at Wingstop and I made an 8% return on my S&P 500, I would still effectively have enough money to live the rest of my life and never worry about money again. That's one thing that I could do. Granted that I didn't become an idiot. All right, another thing that, what else could I do, right? I could sit on this 10.5 acre field and make $500,000 for the rest of my life. Make 350 grand, $500,000 for the rest of my life. If I felt like doing that, I could do that as well. And even then, I would still not worry about money. Right? I wouldn't be concerned about money. Effectively 350, 500 grand. And this is just from what I have seen. Bringing home about $350,000, $500,000 a year is effectively enough money to do anything on the entire planet short of being an idiot. Legitimately, I could legitimately sit here. And if I've already said this, I've already decided to grow my business with the money, right? I've already decided to grow my business, right? I've spoken about this. I speak about this all the time. What am I going to do with the money? If we're not going to talk about it in terms of money and we're going to talk about it in terms of assets, what does that look like, right? Effectively, I sell 20 cattle and I buy 40. That's what it looks like growing my business, right? I sell 20 animals, I buy 35, and I buy 2 loads of grain, right? If I sell my animals at 650 pounds and I bring them in at 250, and I effectively, if I bring them in, let's say I bring them in at 200, 250, 225, something like that. Let's say I bring them in at 200 pounds and I sell them at 650, right? If I do that, I just about double my money. If I sell them at 800, I just about more than double my money, right? That's the whole idea. Right, that's the whole thing. If I take an animal that is 200 pounds and raise that animal to a commercial standard up to 650 pounds, I just about double my money. If I take that animal to 800 pounds, then I just about more than double my money. right? That's the whole thing, right? That's the whole thing, you know. And how do I represent this in terms of a formula? You go on the stock market, you look up the feeder cattle price, take a 10% deduction off that feeder cattle price to account for the fact that I will be purchasing heifers and number 1.5 type animals as well. I don't purchase straight number 1 animals. I also purchase number 1.5 type animals. So I take a 10% deduction off the feeder cattle price, and then I cut that number in half. All right. And when I do that, effectively what I'm looking at is buying a 200-pound, something like that animal, 250-pound animal, something like that. And by the time I take that 200 to 250-pound animal up to 600 pounds, 650 pounds, excuse me, 650 pounds, and I have raised that animal to a commercial standard, I will have just about doubled my money. If I take that animal to 800 pounds, then I will just about more than double my money. That's the entire business, right? The beef business is, and I've said this all the time, it's not complicated. It's not complicated. It's not an opinion. These animals are effectively a commodity. Commodities are effectively gauged by the stock market. All right, this is not confusing. It is what it is. All right, you legitimately just go on Google and you look up feeder cattle price, and when you look up feeder cattle price, that is the price of an 800-pound steer, number 1 type commodity animal. At 800 pounds, that's it. Legitimately, that's it. It's not debatable. It's not like, oh my God, well, I thought. Nobody cares. All right, it is what it is. The price of a commodity is the price of a commodity, and the whole idea of a commodity is that it is what it is. Like, if you go anywhere, if I take one of these cows and I go anywhere, they're effectively going to say, oh, it's a cow and it's worth money. All right, that's how it works. All right, it's not some debatable thing. It's not some confusing thing. All right, and I spoke about this, and the whole thing about, I understand that I am making a drastic amount of money. What am I looking to do with the money? Right? Am I looking to, I could walk off into the sunset if I felt like it. Right? If I legitimately just felt like, oh, well, I don't want to be in the cattle business anymore. I just want to walk off into the sunset. I could sell everything that I have, put all the money in the S&P 500, and then just make it. If I made an 8% return on that S&P 500 and I went and fried chicken at Wingstop, I could effectively buy anything on the entire planet for the rest of my life. Right? I mean, that's one thing I could do. What's another thing I could do? I could sit on this 10.5 acre field for the rest of my life and make it $350,000, $500,000 a year forever. That's another thing I could do if I felt like it. All right, if I felt like sitting here for the rest of my life and just making 350, 500 grand for the rest of the year, I could do that. But I have taken a look at it, and I have decided that I am going to grow my business, right? I am going to grow my business because that is the most logical thing for me to do from what I have seen. All right, I have decided to grow my business. All right, and when I'm growing my business, what does that look like? I bring them in at about 200, 250, number 1 to 1.5 type medium large frame animal, raise them to a commercial standard, liquidate at 650, double my money. If I feel like it's necessary, I can even take them up to 800. If I have a lot of grass, right now I don't really have any grass, and so I wouldn't take my animals up to 800 pounds. It would, the feed cost would just become too high. And so at 650, like even right now, I'm probably feeding about 16, 18 buckets a day. And as long as I'm feeding like less than 20, I'm still making enough money for it to, be a good business for me. And so, and in all honesty, my animals have been on feed for less than a week. They've been on feed for less than a week, and up until today, they've been on grass for like 9 months straight. All right, putting these animals on feed for 1 month, for 2 months is not going to make or break my business. It doesn't matter. All right, putting these animals on feed for a month is not going to matter. Putting these animals on feed for 2 months is not going to matter. If I had these animals on feed year round, that would not be a good business model. That's called feeding cattle. And if you want to get into the cattle feeding business, have fun making your, $50 an animal, $100 an animal. All right, it's a miserable business. Me, I just about double my money every time I sell an animal. And I've been saying, maybe I make $500-700 an animal. I make more than that. All right, well, I mean, I make on the upper end of that. All right, I make about seven, maybe a little bit more than that, $100 an animal. All right, and it is what it is. I've always said, at the end of the day, if this was easy, everybody would be doing it. All right. And when you take a look at my results, I effectively have some of the best results on the planet. I may legitimately be the only person on the entire planet that does something like this. I may be the only one, and just to put things in perspective, this cattle business makes about $350,000, $500,000 a year. I would be willing to bet there is even a possibility that I make even more than 50 grand in the next 30 days. I may legitimately make more than 50,000 in the next 30 days. All right. I'm saying 30 grand as a low estimate. I may even make more than 50,000 in the next 30 days. All right, it is what it is. All right, I effectively, in terms of a realistic perspective, and I'm not saying this to be a prick. I'm just saying it is what it is. If it came down to it, I could legitimately walk off into the sunset for the rest of my life and never worry about money again. And that's also why I put such an emphasis on investing money. All right, the only realistic thing to do with money is to invest it. All right, if you're stuck in a situation where you have legitimately leveraged yourself to the eyeballs, you are using every dollar that you make, that's not good. If you're spending more money than you make, that's horrible. All right, and in terms of a realistic perspective, in terms of like when you look at my situation, like let's just use my situation as an example. And when I do these things, I'm not looking to brag about it. I'm not looking to float my own boat. I'm just saying it is what it is. When it comes to money, I effectively do better than everybody on the entire planet. Effectively everybody, and it's by a massive margin. And when I take a look at what I do, just to put it all into perspective, I spend about 10% of the money that I make. That's it. I spend about 10%. That 10% pays for my house. It pays for my truck. It pays for all of my bills. And the rest of the money, I invested into my business. All of it. And then once I've invested my money and I have stabilized my investment, I will even leverage against it. I actually end up investing more than 100% of my income every year. That's what my financials look like. I invest more than 100% of my income every year. I do not spend more than 100% of my income every year. If you're spending more than 100% of your income every year, that's a very, very, very clear indicator that you're poor. It doesn't matter how much money you make. You're never gonna be able to fix that. Borderline. I mean, practically 0%. Because if you're spending more money than you make every year, if you're doing that, you are digging yourself a bigger hole every single day. And once, and I've even spoken about this, once you put yourself in this massive pit, the chances of getting out of that are practically 0%. All right, practically zero. All right, you don't want to be in a situation where you make $70,000 a year and you're $200,000 in debt, because if you've done that, you're effectively financially doomed for the rest of your life. Almost guarantee it. All right, and in terms of, and like when I take a look at how do I use capital, how do I utilize capital, I spend about 10% of the money that I make. I invest the other 90%. And once I have invested the 90% and I have stabilized my investment, I leverage against it. And just to put things in perspective, over the next month, I may even make more than $50,000 in just the next 30 days. All right, and when I take a look at it for what it is, I mean, okay, and just to put things in perspective, like, the whole thing of, it is what it is, and, okay, so over the next 3 months, I would bet that effectively all of these animals go to market. Okay, they will all effectively hit 650 and they will all go to market. And when I liquidate these animals, I will make, when I liquidate these animals, I will, let's say that I liquidate whatever, let's say I liquidate 25. I have 31, and let's say I liquidate 25. When I liquidate the 25 animals, I will effectively make enough money to buy 50. Effectively 50. All right, and let's say that I go and I buy myself 2 loads of grain, which I wouldn't. Because why would I do that when I will be liquidating animals again the next one? I would buy 1 load of grain. I buy 1 load of grain at a time. But let's just say whatever, right? Let's just say, I have death loss and I buy myself a load of grain. I will still have like 40 animals. I will still have gone from 25, from liquidating 25 to having 40. All right, and that would be like if I lost 8 animals. If I lost 8 animals and I bought a load of grain, I would still have gone from 25 to 40 animals. I would still have expanded my balance sheet by like 70%. All right, that's what it looks like. Okay, I've taken a look at it. I understand that I am making a ballistic amount of money. I effectively make more money on my backyard by myself running commercial cattle than anybody on the planet makes doing just about anything, and it's by a massive margin. Massive margin. I would actually bet that over the next 30 days, I make significantly more. I'm just going to say significantly more than 30 grand. I will make significantly more than 30 grand in the next 30 days. That's how I'll put it. Because I don't want to go too high on the estimate and, and whatever, right? And it just gets the point across. I would bet that over the next 30 days, I make more than 30 grand, significantly more. And I've actually taken a look at it, and I make about $1,200 to $1,400 a day. 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And just to put things in perspective, like, last night I actually slept 8 hours. I actually fell asleep for 8 hours. I slept at it was almost exactly 8 hours. I fell asleep at midnight and I woke up at 8. In those 8 hours that I was asleep, I made myself like $400. If I went out for the rest of the day and did not make any more money while I was awake, I would still have enough money to live the entire day and not be worried about money. But the thing is that my investments, my business continues to make money all the time, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, right? Granted that I do my part. So, this is also what I mean by, it's whatever. I mean, I legitimately made enough money to walk off into the sunset. I legitimately, if I took all of the money that I made, just liquidated all of my assets and put that money in the S&P 500, and I just sat there and fried chicken at Wingstop, I could effectively buy anything on the entire planet for the rest of my life. That's, it is what it is, right? And, that's the whole thing, it just is what it is. I mean, that's legitimately something that I could do. And I don't have to worry about running a business anymore. But I have already decided that I am going to look to do better for myself, right? I have already decided that I will do better for myself. If anything, I will actually double the size of my business by the end of this year. Maybe even more. Because, I've decided that is what I will do, right? And so, I mean, it just is what it is. I mean, when it comes down to it, and I speak about this all the time. The whole thing about something like this is that I actually did it, right? I actually did it, right? Because the whole thing, it's like, I'm living proof that I actually did it. All right, because the whole thing is like, at the end of the day, and I speak about this, like, if you have a bunch of opinions, right? If you have a bunch of opinions and you have nothing to show for it, if you have a bunch of opinions and you have nothing to show for it, then you're legitimately borderline a bum with an opinion. Borderline. And I've talked about this. The whole thing about the average is that almost everybody on the entire planet, almost every individual on the entire planet makes somewhere between $35,000 $90,000 a year. Like if you legitimately went up and you asked the average household, how much money do y'all bring home? Almost everybody will say less than $200,000 a year. Almost everybody. All right, because when you have a household, you effectively, most of the time, you have two earners. You have two earners, and then maybe you have a third earner that's a child, right? So if you asked the average household, how much money do you bring home? Almost everybody will say less than $200,000 a year. Almost everybody. Right? And if you're, which effectively means that, whatever, both the whatever, the parents make, or both of the people that are in the household make less than 90 grand. All right. So, and effectively, if you're looking to move up into the war, and the whole idea is like, if you're legitimately a bum, if you're legitimately impoverished, if you're legitimately homeless, and you find a way to make an extra $2,000 a month, if you're impoverished and you find a way to make an extra $2,000 a month, congratulations, you're middle class. You're middle class. And if you're middle class and you find a way to make an extra $2,000 a month, congratulations, you're now upper middle class. If you are in upper middle class and you make an extra $2,000 a month, congratulations, now you make more money than 90% of the entire country. All right, you make more money than 90% of the entire country. That's effectively how it pans out. And this is also what I mean by, once you start bringing home about $15,000 a month, you can effectively buy anything on the entire planet. You can buy anything on the entire planet. All right? And at the end of the day, when it comes to money, money is not an opinion, right? Money is not an opinion. Right? It's not like, oh my God, well, I thought. Nobody cares, right? Money's not an opinion. At the end of the day, it just is what it is, and I actually managed to do it. That's all I'm saying. I actually managed to do it. It's not an opinion, right? What are you going to do with your opinion, right? Opinions don't do anything, right? If you have a bunch of opinions, and I talk about this in terms of a broader perspective, and the whole idea of the moron megazord. Oh my God, well, a bunch of poor people should just lump together, because if we lump together, we'll do better, right? That's the idea of the moron megazord, which is wrong. It is incorrect. If you have a bunch of poor people and you lump them together, you have a bunch of poor people lumped together. Success, at the end of the day, from what I have seen, success is a one-man journey. Success is a one-person journey. You're going to have to go out and be successful for yourself. Nobody can help you. Nobody can make you successful. Nobody can make you successful. Success is a one-person journey. All right, and if you really do not want to end up in a situation where you have convinced yourself that lumping together, that creating this moron megazord will legitimately improve your life. Because it won't. It won't. I guarantee it. If you put 50 bums together, you do not end up in a situation where you're magically going to do better because you have 50 bums put together. You just have 50 bums put together. Success is a one-person journey. Either you make it or you don't. That's it. And the whole thing about being successful is that, every person has to go and do it for themselves. Nobody is going to hold your hand and make you successful. And at the end of the day, I'm not saying money is everything, but money is a realistic gauge for something like this, simply because the dollar that I make is the same dollar that everybody else makes. Right? The dollar that I make is the same dollar that everybody else makes. And at the end of the day, it just is what it is. All right? And when you take a look at my situation, I legitimately managed to make more money than the entire planet, just about, and it's by a massive margin. In my backyard by myself, starting a commercial cattle business. It is what it is. It's not an opinion. It's not an opinion, it just is what it is. And the whole thing, but the whole thing about becoming successful is that you have to understand that the idea of success is that it is a one-person journey. If you put 50 bums together, if you put 50 poor people together, you will just end up with 50 poor people together. It's not like, oh my God, now that there are 50 of us, we've made a Megazord. And now we're going to do better because there's 50 of us. That's wrong. You just have 50 poor people in a room together. All right, and if anything, everybody's not going to get legitimately, the whole moron Megazord will legitimately get nowhere forever. If anything, you'll be a net negative. Guarantee it. Guarantee it. I would be willing to bet. All right, and the whole idea is in terms of monetary success, the whole idea is you have to understand, in terms of, from what I have seen, the major purpose of money is to make more money with it. And also you should have a moral compass about it. All right, that's the whole thing. You should have a moral compass about it. You should understand that you can utilize money to improve the world. You can actually utilize money to build a better world. You can. All right, it is possible. All right, you can use money to build a better world. All right, you should have a moral compass about it. Go out and utilize capital to make more capital, and also have a moral compass about it. The point of money is not to be an idiot. It's like, oh my God, now that I have money, now I can be an idiot. That's not the point of money. There is no amount of money that will save you from becoming an idiot. Once you have become a poor moron, you will be stuck as a poor moron forever. I would be willing to bet 10,000 to 1. My 10,000 to your 1. I would be willing to bet. Once you have become poor and you have become a poor moron, you are stuck being a poor moron forever. I would be willing to bet. You don't want to become poor. That's the things that from the very beginning, you don't want to become poor. Because once you become poor, it's probably too late. Guarantee it. And how do and I've even spoken about it, even if you're going to end up being broke, you're still better off being broke than you are poor. Because if you're poor, chances are you are digging yourself a bigger hole you are legitimately going to dig yourself a bigger hole, and because of your decision-making process. You are better off being broke than poor. And even if you did that, it would be a miracle. And at the end of the day, if you go from being broke to doing better for yourself on a large scale, that would be incredible as well. But chances are, you have to understand, like when you take a look at a situation like me, right? When you take a look at a situation like me, you have to understand that something like this, what we're talking about is a 0.000000001% success rate. That's what we're talking about, right? When you take a look at a situation like mine, and when I talk about my situation, I'm not looking to be like, oh my God, I'm bragging about it, right? That's not what I'm looking to do, right? I'm just saying, when you take a look at a situation like mine, and I don't want your eyes rolling over into the back of your head either, right? I don't want people's eyes rolling over into the back of the head because my numbers are so large, all right? But when I take a look at, when you take a look at a situation like mine, you have to understand that we're effectively talking about a 0.000000001% success rate. All right, that's effectively what we're talking about. And so something like this, you have to understand that it's not, even if I increased the success rate by 1,000%, legitimately tenfolded the success rate, it would still be less than 50 people on the entire planet that does something like this. The entire planet, even if I increased the success rate by 1,000%, even over 1,000%, it would still be less than 50 people on the entire planet. When you take a look at what I do, it's borderline incredible. I legitimately managed to outperform the commercial standard on a very, effectively managed to outperform the commercial standard in a backyard by myself. Legitimately, that's what I managed to do. That's how I made my money. even if I increased the success rate by over 1,000%, it would still be less than 50 people on the entire planet. That, and so when, and I mean, it just is what it is, all right? And the whole thing about this, and I give the idea of the 10%, right? And, if you're legitimately, committed to the idea of becoming a farmer, like you legitimately want to become a farmer, right? And you're actually going to go and do it. You should be able to get to the 10% mark within 3 years. All right, and at that point, you don't have, and even up until then, you won't have to worry about money because it's not going to cost you a lot of money to learn how to do these things. Maybe a couple $100s a year. And so, I mean, the whole thing about this situation, right? And the whole thing about this, but the whole thing is that you cannot become a poor person to begin with. Because if you become a poor person to begin with, you're practically, I can almost guarantee that you are going to die poor. Guarantee it. Oh my God, maybe if I just lump together with other poor people, then we'll all be better off. You will not be better off being lumped together with poor people. And you see this all the time. Oh my God, what if all the poor people just got together, right? What if all the poor people just got together and then we made some Megazord? Right, and then, oh my God, now we would have some kind of advantage. Guarantee that's not how it works. That's not how it works. Success is a one-person journey, and it's gonna be like the most difficult thing that you have ever done in your entire life. Legitimately, will be like the most difficult thing you have ever done in your entire life. You probably won't even make it to the 10% mark. Most people won't. And just to put things in perspective, I legitimately do not know anybody that even does 10% to this day. Most people cannot even make $50,000 a year on a 10.5 acre field. Most people can't even do that. Almost everybody can't do that. And I do 10 times that. All right, and it is what it is. I mean, take it for what it is. I am just telling you the truth. I am showing you it is what it is. All right, at the end of the day, I actually managed to do it. I'm not making this up. Do my cattle look fake? Does my business look fake? Does my land look fake? Do my checks look fake? I don't make this up. I actually managed to do it. And I'm telling you, it is what it is. Success is a one-person journey. And becoming successful is, and I don't like saying that it's impossible or it's extremely difficult, because then it makes I've always said that it makes my faith in God look weak, and I don't like that. And so what I say is that it takes a long time and it takes a lot of effort. That's what it takes. If you have average IQ and you legitimately commit yourself to the idea of learning how to farm and becoming a farmer, if you have average IQ, you could probably do 95% of this. If you legitimately just started working at it for 15 hours a day. Within 3 years, you should even be able to get to the 10% mark. If you got to the 10% mark, you wouldn't have to worry about money anymore forever, because the money that you need to run your farm will come from your farm. All right, the money that you need for your farm will come from your farm. When you grow the grass and you go and get the cattle and you raise your cattle and you liquidate the cattle, you will make enough money to pay for your farmland, and you will make enough money to pay for your fertilizer and whatever else it is that you need, and you'll probably even make a little bit of money. And then you don't have to worry about the money anymore. The only thing you have to worry about is actually getting better at getting better at farming. That's the only thing. I put a lot of emphasis on this idea. You have to focus yourself on actually learning how to farm. Actually learning how to do it. Because farming is a hard skill. It's not something that is not intuitive. It's not like you're born and you just magically become a farmer. That's not how it works. I was born on a farm. Nobody cares. I'm a 5th generation farmer. I'm a 7th generation farmer. Nobody cares. All right, let me take a look at your balance sheet. All right, because the whole thing is like, it's like if you and you see this happen all the time. Like when I take a look at a farm and it's like, oh my God, well, I got a 500-acre farm and I run 200 cattle a year, and I take a look at that farm and they got all this machinery and they're bringing in their animals at 500 pounds. and they're feeding them a commodity feedstuffs 24/7. It's like, I don't know how else to put it than to just tell you that I make drastically more money than your 500-acre field on my 10.5-acre field in my backyard. I make drastically more money. I run the same number of cattle. I raise them from a lower weight, and I feed 90% of their diet in grass 8 to 9 months out of the year. And I probably put on more weight on my animals on a daily basis. I probably do. And I have one-fifth of the machinery. All right, I legitimately make more money on my 10.5-acre field than almost anybody makes doing anything on the entire planet. And it's by a massive margin. Money is not an opinion, all right? And at the end of the day, if it comes down to it, I will legitimately sit here and be rich by myself. I'm not going to go down a poor person. Oh my God, why don't you just go and be poor like the rest of us? Why don't you just be broke like the rest of us, right? That's effectively what I see that all the time. And it's like, when I listen to, sometimes, whatever, you'll give me, some people will give me their plan, right? Their plan for their life. And I'm like, your plan, I mean, it's like your plan was effectively made because you're resentful, right? You're insecure, you're delusional. And and that's why you made this plan, right? Effectively, and your plan is going to leave you poor and or broke forever, right? It's like when you have a plan, you should have a plan for doing better for yourself, right? I have these assets. I am raising these assets to this. I am doing this with this asset. I am increasing the value of my asset, and when I liquidate my asset, I am going to expand my asset portfolio. That's good, right? Does that sound like a delusion? Does that sound like a resentment? It just is what it is, right? When when I hear people's plans, it's borderline it's borderline, almost all of them are just complete nonsense. Oh my God, well, I got to go and pay for my bills. Oh my God, well, whatever. I'm tough because I managed to pay for my bills. And it's like, well, it's like you're borderline a bum. All right, you have to work on doing better. You have to work on, improving your situation. Like me, I don't, like me, when people ask me, I don't sit there and go, oh my God, I don't like, oh my God, I paid for my bills, right? Oh my, I legitimately work 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. All right, I legitimately work 15 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I've been doing this for years. All right, at the end of the day, if you want to know what it was like to do what I did, then go and do it. Nobody's stopping you. It's a free country. You can do whatever you want. All right, but if you're going to be poor, then die poor by yourself, all right? The whole thing about being poor is that it's borderline pathetic. I mean, you could have, there's a long list of things that you could do other than being poor. Go read a book. All right, go read a book. Go learn something. I don't know, go and practice something. There are a long list of things that you can do other than being poor. All right, why not? I mean, don't convince yourself to be poor, all right? And I would be willing to bet that my business makes over substantially more than 30 grand in the next 30 days. I've taken a look at it, and, I have decided that I will use the money to grow my business, all right? That's what I have decided. All right, I will use the money to grow my business. That is what I have decided. All right, I'm not going to go into, I'm not going to whatever, right? I'm not going to go into, whatever, right? Walk off into the sunset. I'm not going to go and become an idiot. I'm not going to, oh my God, now's my chance to go and buy, I'm not going to do anything like that. I'm just going to grow my business, all right? And so, and the whole thing about this, all right? But, you have to understand that is legitimately, that is legitimately my financial situation. If I genuinely decided that I did not want to be in the cattle business anymore, I just don't want to be in the cattle business, and I liquidated all of my assets, and I put that money in the S&P 500, and I went and fried chicken at Wingstop, I would still make enough money to buy anything on the entire planet for the rest of my life. Granted that I did not become an idiot. I could legitimately walk off into the sunset. That's how much money I've made. But why would I quit the cattle business when the cattle business makes me hundreds of thousands of dollars a year? Why would I quit the cattle business? Would that seem like a reasonable thing to do? I legitimately make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on this cattle business. Over the next month, I will make substantially more than 30 grand. Just over the next 30 days. All right, and for the love of God, do not go and be a part of a moron megazord. For the love of God, that's the one thing. Having a bunch of poor people grouped together, lumped together, does not give you some kind of a superpower. You're just a bunch of poor people stuck together. Go out and do something for yourself, right? Go out and be successful. Understand that success is a journey for one person, each individual themselves. You have to go out and become successful yourself. Nobody is going to drag you into being successful. Nobody is going to make you successful. You have to go out and do it for yourself. And if you have a bunch of opinions and you have nothing to show for it, you're practically a bum with an opinion. Legitimately, you're practically a bum with an opinion. That's it. All right, and the whole thing is go and do, and if you want to become a farmer, then go out and focus yourself on doing 10%. Even doing 10% will probably be so difficult you won't be able to do it. All right, and maybe when you go through that, when you go through some of it, it will make you a better person. All right, because when you go and you do difficult things, it makes you a better person, or it makes you a worse person because you are a pathetic loser. All right, so either go out and do something hard and stick to it, and persevere and turn yourself into a better person, or fail and throw a pissy fit and then quit. But understand that you made the choice. At the end of the day, you make the choice. It's up to you. All right. And I've given away my information for free. You have to understand that I legitimately don't have to worry about money at all forever anymore. I legitimately don't have to worry about money at all. 0%. That's the situation that I'm in. All right. And I'm not lying to you about it. All right. I'm telling you the truth. I am speaking the truth. I give you my information for free. All right. I actually do this stuff in real life. It's not an opinion. All right, you want to die poor by yourself. All right, don't take anybody else down with you. All right, it is what it is. All right, y'all have a good one, YouTube.